What if I tell you that I don't have any more cut content in the God of War series to talk about?
Because we were going to do the no-cut camera, we were looking at being able to have all of the menu systems take place inside the game.
Okay, that's not completely true. I'm sure if I look hard enough, I'll see a couple of things here and there. And trust me, if I find something interesting, you bet your butt I'm gonna be talking about it. But I think for the most part, every big thing that has been cut from the series I've talked about in a top 10 or on a specific video altogether. That's why I wanted to cap this era of the channel by making a video talking about the 10 most regrettable cuts from the series. Now, I know I'm in no position to judge Santa Monica on what should and shouldn't have been cut from the series. I understand that everything they cut wasn't decided flippantly. Chances are, the games are better because of these cuts. But still, there's a part of me that can't help but think that some of these cuts would have made the games much better. That's why I decided to make a list on the 10 most regrettable cuts. The ones that if they were to keep in, would have the biggest impact on the story and the series as a whole. And first off is something that's near and dear to my heart. Jumping. I know platforming isn't the most popular genre in gaming, but at least for me, there are very few things that I find more satisfying than chaining together a bunch of platform mechanics to reach the end of the line. And maybe one of the reasons I gravitated towards God of War instead of other action-adventure games was platforming. But even still, when I look back at it, I don't think Santa Monica pushed this part of the gameplay enough. Especially after the reception the Hades level received. But there was a time when platforming would play a bigger role, and it seems that they were going to showcase it in one of the lost levels of God of War 1. As David Jaffe describes it, in this level Kratos would have to constantly be catching up with this magic elevator. Getting in his way would be multiple platforming challenges such as climbing walls, jumping over rolling logs, and also some good old combat. This level in a way predates the main mechanic that you now see in a battle royale game, as Kratos would have to get on the elevator to avoid getting killed by a magical sandstorm. The way he describes it, it makes it seem like this level would have been really intense, leading to multiple runs until the player finally got the timing right. Again, I know that platforming isn't for everybody, but I just feel like if Santa Monica had finished this level, it might have changed the course of the series' history. Maybe instead of people hating the Hades section, more people would be down for platforming to play a bigger role in future games. Instead, we got the opposite and saw less of it with each games they released, until it was cut completely from the game. Okay, so now let's talk about a cut boss fight that I think about at least once a week. The God of Fear, Phobos. Phobos was planned as a boss fight for God of War Ascension. At first, when Kratos would come across him, he would have the appearance of a giant Spartan soldier. But as the fight progressed, multiple damage takes would slowly begin to reveal his true form, a massive undead creature. From an artistic point of view, I already loved this design, but having Phobos in the game would have also added a lot to the story in my opinion. You see, one of the biggest issues I have with the story of Ascension is Ares, or the lack of Ares. Given how important he is to the story, it's a shame that we never get to interact with him at all. But with Phobos, this issue might have been fixed slightly, because in the mythology, Phobos is Ares' son. And as you know, part of the story of God of War Ascension deals with the Marked Warrior prophecy. Halfway through it gets revealed that Orcos was the first Marked Warrior. But what if there were more? What if Phobos was trying to prove to his father that he was indeed the true Marked Warrior and not Kratos? That way, the story would have a failed Marked Warrior, a Marked Warrior that's trying to get away from his oath, and a Marked Warrior who's trying to impress his father. I don't know, I think having this minor deity in the story would have added a lot more value to the game. Next is another sad cut from God of War Ascension. While Phobos might have helped Ascension in the story department, I doubt very much it would have saved it completely. This next entry, however, I think it could have saved God of War Ascension and even make it one of the best-selling games in the series. I'm talking about the Lost Co-op mode. It's not a secret that the multiplayer in God of War Ascension wasn't the best one in the market. I still think there was some fun to be had here due to how unique it was, but it definitely couldn't compete with other titles of 2013, especially compared to the much more successful The Last of Us factions, which in and of itself has now become a completely cut game for Naughty Dog. Leave an F in the comments to pay your respects. But when it came to Ascension, we all knew that translating the single player mechanics into a multiplayer setting was going to be difficult. But that's why I think it would have been better if they had stuck to the original idea they had. A co-op mode where one player would play as Kratos and the other one would play as Artemis, with Artemis being a hybrid creature, half humanoid and half animal. Aside from this, not much else is known about this co-op mode, but it is possible that the villain Kratos and Artemis would face was the primordial goddess Nyx, as there's a Nyx concept art that shows Artemis in it as well. Moreover, I think this mode would have been better than the multiplayer because it could have been more important to the story of the series overall. You see, God of War Ascension ends with Kratos seeking to rid himself of the nightmares that plague him. Canonically, what he does next is pledge his servitude to the gods of Olympus to achieve this. And here's when the gods start giving Kratos missions that would last for 10 years. So it's possible that some of these missions might have been with the goddess Artemis. So in a way, the co-op mode would have been a sequel to God of War Ascension, Right after finishing the main story, you could jump into the co-op mode and see where the story would go next. Imagine if this mode became a hit and every few months we would get another mission with Artemis or even other gods as DLC. It's hard to say, but I think this direction would fit the God of War series a lot more than random Greek dudes fighting in an arena. It's really a shame because I don't think we're ever gonna get an opportunity like this ever again. Next is something that if it were to be kept in, it wouldn't be something that would change the God of War history in the same way the co-op mode would, but it is something that I think would have been really unique. I'm talking about the War Elephant. One of the things I dislike about God of War Chains of Olympus the most is the simplistic fight with the Persian king. You would imagine that a fight with the ruler of the Persian Empire would have more spectacle to it. Instead, it's just a big guy with a couple of simple attacks. But this wasn't always the case. Originally, the player would have to fight this character as he rode a freaking war elephant. The only footage that has survived from this is the one you're watching right now. This is sad because I truly think this fight would have stood out more as an intro fight if they had kept this elephant in. But unlike the cut co-op mode, there's still a sliver of hope that we might see a war elephant. No, not that one, but one in Egypt.
We have a long journey ahead.
And we're back to another God of War Ascension cut. This time around, I don't want to talk about a level, mechanic, or even a boss fight. I want to talk about a character. Just a character. Archimedes. Just from a historical point of view, having Santa Monica create a version of one of the most famous Greek figures would have been exciting enough. But Archimedes also has a semi-important role in the story of God of War Ascension, that role being the creator of the statue of Apollo, a location in the game you'll spend most of the time on. In the Ascension art book, the artist who was in charge of creating this character talks about how you would have encountered him in a cinematic, where he would explain the history behind the massive statue. And as you guys know, I love me a good statue, especially one that contains lenses that can see into another reality. I'm assuming this is another reality because the game in its final state doesn't explain what this other location is. So it's very possible that Archimedes was responsible for shedding some light on this mystery. I say this because in his concept art, he has a surveyor tripod with what I assume to be the same lenses as the ones in this puzzle. I know this cut isn't something that most God of War fans care about because every time you come across one of these architects in the games, they are always dead. But I think it would have been refreshing if at least one of them could tell us a story of the game's main location. That's why I feel like having Archimedes in it would have added a lot more value to the story. Now moving on to another cut lens thing, we have the original form of realm travel in God of War 2018. Look, everybody knows I love the realm travel mechanic in God of War 2018, probably even more than the one in Ragnarok. But the original concept was a lot different than the one we got, and it might have even been better if they had succeeded in getting it to work. Originally, the player would be given a lens thing that allowed him to see into other realms. Sometimes you would be able to walk right through, and some other times you would need to use the mechanic during certain puzzles. Aside from this, not much else is known about it. If it wasn't for Corey briefly talking about it, we wouldn't even know of it. Unfortunately, this mechanic was cut because it made it too difficult to load the levels in. Now, interestingly enough, this mechanic sounds very similar to the rift mechanic in the last Ratchet & Clank game. So this was a mechanic that was definitely too ahead of what the PlayStation 4 could do. Now, Ragnarok did do something similar as you no longer had to go to a specific point in the map to realm travel. But because it was still cross-gen, it wasn't nearly as fun as the original idea Corey talked about. Hopefully one day we'll get something like it in the future. The next entry, I have to admit, isn't something that would have changed the course of God of War history. But it is odd as to why they cut it in the first place. That has to be the lost level of Sparta from God of War 2. As you can see in this footage, the level was pretty much completed. What happened to it? This is a question I tackled in a video a couple of months back. You see, back then I discovered that the same soldiers you see in this footage could be seen in the intro of God of War 2. Around this discovery, I created a whole theory as to where this level was going to be placed in the final game. But not too long after uploading this video, a very special Santa Monica developer commented on the video which pretty much disproved my whole theory. And boy, am I glad he did. Because now we know a little bit more about this mystery. Based on what Bruno said, I believe this might have been the original intro level of God of War 2. This would explain why Kratos is still wearing his god armor. But why cut it then? This level was almost completed. Overall, I'm not too upset with this cut because we ended up getting another Sparta level a little later, and the final intro of God of War 2 is perfect in my opinion, and wouldn't change a single thing about it. What bothers me is the secrecy surrounding this level. Why exactly was this cut? But hey, maybe that's just me. Next, an entry that hurts me a little bit more, because I think it would have added a lot more value to God of War 1. And that is Pandora's Guardian. God of War 1 is, if you overlook the aspects that haven't aged that well, easily a PlayStation 2 masterpiece. However, the only thing that was missing was a boss fight in the upper section of the Pandora temple. There's already one below, why not have one guarding Pandora's box itself? Well, if you're wondering that, you're not the only one. Because there was originally going to be a boss fight there, a giant bird-like creature surrounded by conveyor belts and her eggs. And given that this is a God of War game, you can probably guess what the main mechanic in the boss fight would have been. Kratos would move the eggs around using the conveyor belts to either get her attention or distract her. I wish I could tell you more about it, but once again this fight was in its very early stages. Unfortunately it had to be cut because Santa Monica ran out of time to make it. But from the description it seems like it was going to follow that initial style of boss fights that had a small puzzle element to it. So it's a shame we'll probably get nothing like it ever again. Okay, so up until now I've been very understanding with all of these cuts. While sad about it, I always come around to understanding why they had to cut it. But this next one, oh, this is a hill I'll die on. I think enough time has passed for even the biggest fans of God of War Ragnarok to admit that the game has some pacing issues. One of the ones that stands out the most being the ending itself. The story up until that part moved on the slower side of things for better or for worse. But soon after Brock dies, the story suddenly feels like it's moving at lightning speed. This is because a huge part of the ending was cut from the final game. Now, I got this information from the YouTuber Omega Fantasy, who went into the game's codes or files and dug up the dialogue for this section of the game. So if you want a more detailed explanation of this level, I recommend you watch this video, which will be linked in the description below. But briefly speaking, originally the power Surtur gave to Kratos' blades wouldn't have been enough to bring out the Ragnarok beast. Instead, Surtur would have died. This would lead Atreus to lie to Sinmara by telling her that Odin was the one who killed her beloved Surtur. Kratos and Atreus would be successful in bringing Sinmara to the Spark of the World, where she would unite her heart with Surtur's. And this is when the Ragnarok beast would come to life. But hold on, because next was the preparation for Ragnarok itself, something that the final game desperately needed. Here, Kratos and Atreus would go to Svartalheim, where they would see that the war machines the dwarves had created were no longer there, hinting that Odin had taken them to Asgard in preparation for the Ragnarok battle. Which he did. They would also go to Helheim, where they would see Mimir and Hildisvini convincing Hel to help them in battle. This whole section is what was missing from Ragnarok. I understand why Santa Monica cut it, it was probably going to make the game way too long, but in my opinion this wouldn't be a big deal because the story of God of War Ragnarok was already long enough. Taking an extra hour or two wouldn't really have made much of a difference. And I think this mission could have added a lot more weight to the Ragnarok fight and consequently the ending. But oh well, this is something I'll eventually move on. But what I'll probably never stop thinking about is the number 1 entry. Deimos. If you've been following the channel for a while, you might know that I recently made a full video talking about this topic. So it might seem like I make this top 10 to plug in this other video. And to some extent, you're right. Because I think that video is really cool, probably one of the best I've ever done. But I also think Deimos deserves the number 1 spot because, unlike everything else I talked about in this video, Deimos wasn't a small part of the game that was cut. From the evidence, it seems like the game was going to have a completely different story from the one we got. One where we saw both Kratos and Deimos in conflict while the end of the world would play in the background. So much work into this story that in your copy of God of War 3, you will still find things that belong in that story, like the theme Brothers of Blood. In the video, I go into a lot of evidence as to how Chronicler and I made this discovery, like the concept art that shows Deimos trapped in Hades instead of the realm of the dead. I'm telling you, this is probably one of the most comprehensive videos I've ever made. But I'll leave you with something I didn't cover in the video. Something that when I learned of it, it almost gave me a heart attack out of excitement. This original Deimos in God of War 3 would have been voiced by the talented Elijah Wood. And here's a clip of him talking about a very interesting scene that was cut.
Who did Elijah Wood voice in God of War? I'd completely forgotten I did a voice for that. Apparently Kratos' brother Deimos. And I remember I was killed and I get my head ripped off. I had to scream. That was, yeah, I vaguely remember that. That was so long ago. That's it.
So yeah, those were the 10 most regrettable cuts in the God of War series. I'm sure you have a different list in mind, so definitely let me know in the comment section below what your picks are. Now, as always, I want to give a big thanks to all of my members for supporting the channel monthly. Without you guys, none of these videos on future projects I'm planning would ever get made. So from the bottom of my heart, guys, thank you. I would also like to thank everyone who likes and shares my videos. I know it doesn't seem like much, but trust me, it really does help. And with that said, thanks for watching. And remember, go forth in the name of Olympus.